Hi there, this is Jonathan Ginsberg, and today I'd like to talk to you about a topic that gets a lot of traffic on my blog, and that is reaffirmation in Chapter 7. And I was kind of surprised, frankly, that I got so many comments and so many questions about reaffirmation. It seems fairly straightforward that you go into Chapter 7, you want to keep property, you reaffirm it, but a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion about it, and so I thought, let me just go through and kind of give you a big picture overview of the reaffirmation process, starting from really some definitions and then going through what happens in bankruptcy and then the pros and cons. So this is going to be a multi-part series because I don't want to make these videos too long. And the first part is going to really just be to explain to you what the difference is between secured and unsecured debt. For some reason, there seems to be some confusion about that, so let's get our terms straight. And basically, and then the next video will go into the bankruptcy aspects of reaffirmation, and then I'll talk about pros and cons and what I've heard from people coming out of bankruptcy, whether they've reaffirmed or not. So first, let's talk about what it means to be a secured debt. And I think, again, there can be some confusion about this. Basically, a secured debt is when a creditor takes a property interest in something that you buy or that you own. And most of the time, secured debts are going to be what they call purchase money, which means that if, for example, if you go and you buy a car and you finance it with GMAC or Ford Motor Credit, then GMAC or Ford Motor Credit has a security interest in that vehicle. So you sign typically two documents. One is you're signing a promissory note where you're saying, I promise to pay this debt. And the second thing is you're giving the lender, Ford or GMAC or whoever, a security interest in that particular property. So if you don't pay, if you default on the promissory note, they have the right to come and take action to recover that particular property. In a mortgage situation, if you sign a mortgage agreement, you're giving the lender a security interest in your home, your real estate, plus you're signing a promissory note. If you don't pay, they can repossess. They can't use self-help like a vehicle lender can, but they can initiate foreclosure. Now, by contrast, an unsecured creditor like a credit card, MasterCard, Visa, American Express, the only link they have to you, between you and that debt, is the promissory note. You've promised to pay, but if you don't pay, they have to sue you. And they can sue you, they have to give you notice, you can defend it and so forth, but they can't just come to your house and grab your car. And that's the really big difference, that a secured debt is tied specifically to an item of property or parcels of property, personal or real property, whereas unsecured debt is simply a promissory note. So when you get into reaffirmation, we're generally talking about secured debt. And what's going on there is essentially with a reaffirmation, what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, when I file bankruptcy, the promissory note part, the promise to pay, that goes away. And now we're going to really talk about the secured debt part of it. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to reaffirm the debt, but we're going to reinstate essentially the promissory note, and the secured debt part remains. So in other words, if you go into a bankruptcy, the personal obligation, your personal liability disappears with discharge, but the liability, the property liability, does not go away. So if I file Chapter 7 and I include Ford or GMAC, they still have a property interest in my vehicle, but I have no personal liability. If they were to repossess the vehicle, they cannot pursue me for a deficiency claim. So again, in a bankruptcy context, understanding the difference between secured and unsecured is very important, because if it's a secured debt, there's both a promissory note and a security agreement, and you will be liable on both. The bankruptcy eliminates the personal liability, the property part remains, and if you go into bankruptcy and you reaffirm, you're essentially going to reinstate the personal property part of it, or the personal liability part of it. So that is big picture, the difference between secured and unsecured debts. For the most part, when you're dealing in a reaffirmation context, we're dealing with secured debts, so you can keep the property. You can reaffirm, I guess, an unsecured debt, and that would be if you wanted to keep a credit card debt open, or if you had a cosigner, somebody to that effect, but that's much less common. So Generally, when we're talking about reaffirmation, we're talking about secured debts. So I hope that those definitions make sense. Again, secured debt is where there's debt tied to the property. A promissory note is simply a promise to pay. A security interest is where you give the lender a property interest in a particular item of property, and those terms will be used throughout the reaffirmation process. So this is the end of part one about reaffirmations. Next part, we're going to talk about what happens when you file bankruptcy and what the considerations are for filing a reaffirmation agreement. So for now, this is Jonathan Ginsberg, and we'll see you at part two.